David was frozen, not moving a single muscle, as if paralyzed by the voice. He clamped his hands hard over his ears, trying desperately to drown out the voice that seemed to come from everywhere.
Oh, come now, David. That is no way to treat your friends.
David stopped then, and slowly began to remove his hands from his ears. It was just as he had unclasped his hands completely that another voice made its presence known. One that David had repressed for oh so long.
Yes. Davy boy, I am your friend.
At the mere recognition of this new voice, a new kind of fear took David. He began to shake uncontrollably. He immediately shut his eyes and began to pray to whatever God would hear his desperate pleas. He prayed for everything around him.
Please. Please, no. It can't be. It can't be real.
As if reading his thoughts, the Hatter spoke again, lifting his dirty, gloved hand and placing it on David's trembling shoulder.
Oh, Davy boy. Davy boy. You think I'm not real? I thought you would know better than that.
David suddenly felt the urge to turn around. He did not want to, and in fact he tried with every ounce of his waning strength to fight it. But his body disobeyed his mind, and he slowly began to turn his body.
David, look behind you.
Came the low, raspy voice of the razor-mouthed creature that called itself a cat. David did so, only to find nothing. David could feel himself spinning as he heard the Hatter call,
Oh, David. How I have missed you.
When the spinning sensation stopped, he was face to face with a door with elaborate designs adorning every inch of it, and through the door he heard his daughter's voice call to him. While crossing the threshold of the door, David heard a new voice, a hushed, quiet, and almost forgotten voice.
You should not have returned. She is in danger because of you, David.
As he walked through the door, he was once again face to face with his daughter in the hospital room. Luckily, they were alone, as it must have looked quite strange for anyone in his vicinity to see him just black out for a good solid chunk of time. At least, that is what he thought had happened. David did not wish to understand, nor did he understand, the illogical rules that governed the strange void that he had been cast into. Alice looked her father in his terror-filled eyes and simply giggled. David gave her a confused look, until she spoke. She said only 5 words, but that was enough.
You saw them, didn't you?
David was speechless, staring into his daughter's eyes with fright riddling his every expression. And then he saw something that made his very skin crawl. For only a second, he saw his baby girl's baby blues twinkle with a wicked red glare that was all too familiar. The message was clear to David at that point. The creatures that haunted Alice were no strangers, for they had haunted David's every waking night as a child. Later that day, David met with an old friend of his, Dr. Carmine Richards. The two had met while David was on trade business in South Wales, selling various spices and herbs. Carmine was a master psychologist with a patient success rate unmatched by anybody in all of England. This was partly due to the doctor's secret weapon, a relatively new art known as hypnotism. Dr. Richards kept this skill a secret, only using it as a last resort in extreme cases. David met with Carmine in his office in London that day.
Ah, Mr. Liddell. Please come in. Have a seat. I've just brewed some fresh tea.
Good to see you again, Carmine. But please, call me David.
All right then, David. What can I do for you?
David thought for a moment, attempting to formulate how he was going to explain to the doctor what he needed to say, without being looked at like a maniac.
Well, it's hard to explain. I'll do my best to do so. It's Alice.
Alice. Oh, of course, your daughter. How is Alice?
Not well, I'm afraid. There's something that has been talking to her. And she has been talking back to it.
Well, David, that's simply an imaginary friend. It's completely...
No! This is different!
How do you mean, David?
It's changing her. There's a glimmer in her eyes. Something evil.
The doctor stared at him, confused for a moment, his brain telling him to call and have the man in front of him admitted to the nearest asylum. But then, something told him not to. He did not know why, but he knew he had to hear what David had to say.
Go on.
I know it sounds crazy, but something is wrong with my little girl. Up here.
David ended his statement by tapping his forehead, indicating what he meant to the doctor.
What exactly do you want me to do, David?
She keeps going on about something she calls Wonderland, and somebody called the Hatter. I want you to find out where this nonsense that she's going on about comes from. I want to find out what's going on in her head.
With those words, it was then clear to the doctor what David was asking of him.
I will talk to Alice and see what I can do, but I make no promises.
Thank you, Carmine. I'll get her first thing tomorrow.
Later that day, as he passed by his daughter's room, he once again heard her talking aloud to the Hatter. Worried, he entered the room. He entered to much the same scene as he had done the previous week. Alice was sat at her little pink table, with a teacup set at each chair. He looked to the other 3 chairs, and in the one directly next to Alice sat the Hatter. His ratty top hat nearly scraped the ceiling due to its monstrous height, and his eyes glowed a bright and radiant red. Alice looked to her father and beckoned him to sit.
Join us, Papa.
Before David could reconsider, the door behind him slammed shut. He turned to face the Hatter, and he was faced with a wicked ear-to-ear grin.
Yes. Do come and join our little tea party, David.
David once again began to pray, hoping against all the hope that he still had left that the apparition in front of him was indeed not of reality. A foolhardy game in the end, eh, Davy boy? The Hatter was quick to remind him of this as well.
Some people never learn. Have I not told you that I am quite real, David? Do you really think praying will save you?
The Hatter disappeared then, in a puff of gray and red smoke. David frantically turned in circles, attempting to locate his tormentor. David could hear his voice all around him saying,
Don't worry, David. You don't have to be afraid.
Whispered the Hatter, as he leaned in close to whisper directly into his ear.
It's all hurt!
Screamed the Hatter, causing David to turn and throw all of his weight against the door. However, as soon as he was about to bust through the wood of the door, it opened as he ran out, causing him to fall to the floor of the hallway. David quickly got to his feet, his gaze meeting that of his very concerned-looking wife.
Good heavens, David. Are you all right, dear?
She gasped. David scrambled to compose himself, his fear slowly being replaced with embarrassment. David took a deep breath, steadied his pounding chest, and then began to speak.
I'm fine, dear. Well...
He trailed off.
Yes? What is wrong? Out with it then!
It's Alice.
He said at last.
Alice?
She questioned.
What about Alice? Is something wrong with her?
Well, yes. And no.
It can't be both, David. Which is it?
She said, annoyed, putting her hands on her hips authoritatively.
You mean you haven't noticed it?
I can't say that I have. Is this about her imaginary friend?
David froze up as those words fell from his wife's lips. Did she know about them?
No. There's no way she knows what they are. Sort of. I think it's time I take her to see Dr. Richards.
The hypnotist?
Yes, but Carmine is also a renowned psychologist. And what with the weird things going on, and...
Weird things? Exactly what weird things have been going on? Is there something you want to tell me, David?
The worry had spread across his wife's face, and this conversation was looking very bad for poor David.
You mean you really haven't noticed them?
David, the weirdest thing that I have seen all week was you bursting out of your daughter's room and falling on the floor like a damn fool. Mixed with how you're talking, I'm wondering if maybe you are the one who needs to see Dr. Richards. Now, if you have something to tell me, you have better do it. Now!
David wanted to explain, wanted to tell his wife about those things, those creatures. He wanted so many things in that moment, yet before he could have done any of them, his wife had walked down the hallway towards the master bedroom. David was desperate to piece together just how things had turned so bad so quickly. As he stood there, thinking the whole situation over, he barely noticed his daughter's room opening slowly behind him. David turned quickly to the door when he heard his daughter's voice.
Silly Daddy.
She squealed. For a moment, she appeared normal, until she opened her mouth once more to speak. It wasn't Alice's voice that came forward from the girl's lips.
Looks like not even your wife will believe you.
Now filled with rage at the thought of that thing residing inside his daughter, he grabbed Alice by the shoulders and shook her violently. As he did, with all the conviction that he possessed, he addressed the Hatter directly.
You get the hell out of my daughter, you son of a bitch!
Suddenly, Alice cried out, this time the young girl's own voice coming forth.
Mommy, Mommy.
She cried in mock terror. Before David could move or even begin to react, Janice was there once again, standing next to her husband.
What is it, Al?
She began, but paused when she saw the tears streaming down her face. She also noticed her husband, hands clasped in a near-death grip around Alice's shoulders.
Daddy yelled at me and grabbed me and it scared me, Mommy.
The look of absolute anger that beamed at him from his wife's face clearly spoke the thoughts on her mind. Gone now was the expression of worry from before, and now a fiery glare shot into David's eyes, though the words which then followed were more burning than anything else could have been.
David Bishop Little! How dare you yell at my little girl? What on earth has gotten into you?
It wasn't her.
What wasn't who?
That is not Alice.
He belted, the words seeming to suck the air from David's lungs. David's wife, having made clear that she could not understand what nonsense her husband had been spewing, put her right hand up to David, while the left comforted Alice, who had buried her crying face into her mother's shoulders.
Enough! Alice, sweetie, go outside.
But why, Mama?
You and I are going to plant some new flowers together. Would you like that, dear?
Yeah.
Good. Now go out to the garden and wait for me. I will be there in just a minute. I need to speak with your father.
Alice then wiped the remaining tears from her red eyes and jumped off her mother's shoulder and down the stairs. She proceeded out the back door and out to the massive garden that belonged to Mrs. Liddell. Once Janice could see Alice outside, she turned her attention back to her husband.
Darling, please. You have to believe me.
Don't bother, David. Now, I don't know what that was back there, but it better not ever happen again. I won't have you scaring Alice because of your paranoia is making her see and hear things.
She ended her angry outburst by stomping back down the stairs and out towards the garden. David was left in a state of utter hopelessness as he lay there, broken by the things that had been plotting against him for so many unknown and unsuspected years. It was a crippling sense of defeat and a sharp pain in his side. It was an angry wife, and what of Alice? How was she faring wherever she was? Wherever she was. That thought hit David with an answer so painfully and slowly that it tortured him. There was no doubt in David's mind after the incident in the hallway. There was no other explanation. He was not crazy. He was not insane. He couldn't be. It couldn't be. In that moment, in the wake of convincing himself that he was not a lunatic, that he was most definitely sane and of completely sound mind, did that one solitary word, those letters of malevolence that formed the name of the one thing that David so desperately wanted to forget. As if plucked from the strings of a master harpist, that one word fell solemnly from David's shivering lips. And that word was...
Wonderland.
I do so hope you enjoyed that chapter, kiddies. Coming up, we have Chapter 7. This next chapter will go into David's story, and I implore all of you to pay close attention to the details and rules that will be set up in these next chapters, as they will come into play in the present-day troubles that we face with Alice, David, and the Hatter. Next month, Chapter 7. Pieces of the Past. Stay tuned, kiddies.